by the military-industrial complex.
And now, the Taliban will pay a price.
Do we have the confidence to do in the Middle East what our fathers and grandfathers accomplished in Europe and Asia?
The situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating.
What I do oppose is a dumb war.
I know.
We all have red dots.
All right.
Welcome back to the Boardwalk podcast. Today is December 7th, so happy Pearl Harbor Day. I guess, is that what you say? Happy Pearl Harbor Day?
I think you just say it
so.
is Pearl Harbor Day. And
It is Pearl Harbor Day. Yeah.
yeah.
A day that
It's
will
not really a happy one.
No, a day that will live in infamy and resulted in the deaths of, I don't know, millions of people across the globe.
And the birth of Stu.
Yes, Stu, how are you connected to Pearl Harbor? Go ahead.
Well, my parents liked Larry Bird, and they thought, hey, if we set things up right, he can be born on the same day as Larry Bird. So kind of
nice.
worked out. But,
Well,
yep,
Larry
Bird's birthday is December 7th.
Yeah.
Well, what a great day for
Great day for
Bad day
America
and
right
everything.
there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
but you know what? It's not a great day for America. Donald Trump bashing. Well, to be fair, I mean he's right, but he was also kind of responsible for it. Bashing
Right.
Millie at Mar-a-Lago. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to start with that just because we haven't really. If you may have noticed, the start of this season, we've done a little more background information, and today's episode's no different. So to talk about something that's a little more current, was like over the last week or something like that. Donald Trump held another like get together at Mar-a-Lago, as he is known to do at this point in time, and at one point he's talking about General Milley, and he calls General Milley, he says something along the lines of, I didn't realize that this guy was a fucking idiot. And to be fair, I mean, look, General Milley's not the smartest guy, right? I mean, he thought that keeping 2,500 troops in Afghanistan in perpetuity until there is no more Afghanistan or United States of America or Earth because of climate change, that somehow that was going to make matters better. It was going to sustain a terrible failing government, and it wasn't going to. But the reason why Donald Trump says that is General Milley was trying to explain to him that we can't pull the equipment out of the country. And Donald Trump's solution, I watched the exchange, was we can't just drive them to Pakistan. It's like, no, dude, we can't just drive fucking tanks or whatever we have in like Herat over to Pakistan. Yeah. It's not how this works.
Yeah, I'm reading like an insider article right now, and so to be clear, he called him a quote fucking idiot. So yeah, Trump dropping an F-bomb, and then he's like, and then there's a quote from Trump said, I said the moment I can't do a Trump voice, so you're gonna have to forgive me. I said the moment we get out, I want every nut, every bolt, every screw. We're taking everything. We're taking the tents down. And he said they left all the tents, they left everything. Because Milley said, sir, it's cheaper to leave the equipment than to bring it. And he's like, can't we fly in a bunch of pilots to fly it out? Like, I don't know. I mean, we did leave the Taliban a hell of a lot of weapons, though. So,
I mean, we didn't even fly out all the people, so or all the Americans.
True.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, you're right. He's not completely wrong. He isn't. But he's got to understand like the cost of shit. It would have been cheaper to just blow that shit in place, which the problem is we didn't do enough of that.
Yeah.
Like you see the Taliban riding around in brand new fucking equipment. Well, I mean, it's a couple years old, but the Afghans never used it. So it's brand new equipment. And all we had to do was chuck a grenade in like every fucking one on the way out. And that probably does something a little more than now arming our biggest enemy of the last 2 decades.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, we got to, water under the bridge now, folks. It's water under the bridge.
It is.
I mean, they can enter with M4s, and we can.
Yeah. But at the same time, Donald Trump did try to pull everybody out in the span of 2 weeks. So, I mean, there's a great Axios podcast. It was talking about all the shit that led up to January 6th, and I'm not going to worry about that. That's not what this podcast is for, but I'm sure we have some great thoughts on that one day. But they did a follow-up episode regarding Donald Trump wanting to, pretty much from the day that happened to the day that Joe Biden was inaugurated, he had this plan in place. Well, I'm not going to call it a plan. He had an idea that we could get everybody out of Afghanistan between the 7th of January and the 20th of January. And that wasn't going to fucking happen, right? So at the same time, yeah, he's calling Milley an idiot because he wouldn't fly in a couple hundred helicopters and pilots and planes, because that's just also not feasible. But he thought it was possible to try to retrograde the remaining, I think at that point, like 4,000 to 5,000 people plus contractors and civilians. That wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, like you said, you could have blown it in place. You could have pulled some of those incendiary grenades out, just melted stuff. But they didn't do enough of that. So now every video you see of the Taliban, they got full United States military equipment. So
Yeah.
Maybe the next step is that we are going to give the Taliban money to buy incendiary grenades to blow the equipment in place.
they promised they would blow the stuff up.
They said they would do it, just like they said they would have, abide by all 9 provisions in the Doha Agreement. Of course, they're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think they abided by one.
But Trump isn't. I mean, he's not wrong. I mean, Milley wanted to leave a contingent force there, which has done us no good for the past, half a decade, living a contingent force. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know if Milley's a fucking idiot, like Trump said, but I mean, I wouldn't vote for him.
I mean, I think I think the biggest issue is that it seems like nobody had a plan. Like, obviously, the buck should stop with the guy in charge, but clearly nobody had a plan. I mean, we've seen from from what Congress has said on the matter, plenty of them agreed with Milley that, we'd be able to leave a token force and somehow maintain some semblance of control over the country. Like if you had, 4,000 troops even, how much of a difference would they be able to really make? I mean, we saw over the past 5 years as the numbers continued to shrink down that we were able to affect less and less, and yet nobody caught on to that.
Right. I mean,
change. Yeah.
When we were there, there were 8,000? 8,000 troops?
8 to 10, something like that.
Yeah, we couldn't do anything. So
I mean, look, realistically, you could have the entire fucking 101st Airborne Division in Afghanistan if they're relegated to being at the fucking bases and they can't go out and conduct operations. It doesn't matter how many people are in Afghanistan, because by that time we were an advise and assist element only, anyways. And especially like this last year leading up to the withdrawal, we were absolutely firmly non-combat, because like when we were there, we were conducting drone strikes and shit like that, and a lot of that shit died down in the last 18 months after we signed that agreement with the Taliban. So the idea, like I said, yeah, you could have an entire fucking division, you could have the entire fucking Marine Corps in Afghanistan. If they're stuck to the bases, it wouldn't have made a difference how many were there.
Yeah. And I mean, special forces were still conducting operations, but I mean, they're power. You can tell that we've been in a place too long because the PowerPoints to get you off the wire become longer and longer. Like as you extend your time there, I think at one point it was like a 42 slide PowerPoint to do like a certain level of operation just to get off the wire and go somewhere, and it's like it's insane.
It should be no more than 3 slides.
Yeah. Including a cover slide.
The question is, I mean, you're at war. Why are we doing PowerPoints to get men out there?
You've got a cover slide. You got a cover slide. You have the slide with the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, what they're wearing, and where, and what their house looks like. And then you have like the third slide, which is just your sources. So really, it's a 1 slide con op.
Yeah. And no reason for it to be any longer. But like, yeah, there you go.
No, utterly fucking stupid. Right. So there was that. And then the other just absolutely untrue news that has come out this week is that Ahmad Massoud, the leader of the National Resistance Front, has supposedly met with Eric Prince, who is the founder of Blackwater and the brother of former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. There's no fucking way that's true. And I think every source that says that is an Indian newspaper. And India loves lying about Afghanistan just as much as Pakistan.
Yeah, I can't imagine how that meeting would even go. I mean, it, he wants to hire a private military corporation to do what? take Panjshir back? I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. One, his money's probably all tied up in the Massoud Foundation, anyways, right? And then whatever he's getting in donations. I mean, where the fuck would they get the money to pay Blackwater, or Z, or Academy, or whatever the fuck they're called nowadays?
And what are you going to hold? How are what are you going to hold? How are you going to maintain supply lines? War is expensive, especially hiring a private military. I mean, God, we were probably comparatively overpaid for our jobs. It's much cheaper to move in soldiers compared to contractors. Despite the hopefully higher quality that we provided, at least for analysis. But yeah, moving in like former SEALs and whatnot that are going to cost you 3 times what a regular SEAL team would cost you. I mean, they can't maintain that. It's total horseshit.
No, they can't maintain that, and there's no private military company that would look at that and go, yeah, we'll go take Panjshir back.
Yeah. Right.
Because then what?
Yeah, I mean,
choke points. Yeah, choke points work both ways. So you get the valley, and then everybody dies.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no way that that's a true story. So,
no.
And even if he did meet with him, he can't afford Eric Prince because, I mean, the United States could barely afford Eric Prince. And he's a war criminal now anyway, so whatever.
God, yeah. all those old vehicles of them just like blazing through Baghdad, getting to like traffic and just shooting in the air to push their way through and shit. It's nuts.
Oh yeah, it is. But I will find, if you want to find information about Afghanistan that is patently untrue, but it's untrue in a way that paints either the Taliban in a negative light or it paints the resistance in a positive light, man, Indian media Twitter pages are perfect for that. It is amazing the type of shit they put out. They've been saying that Habatullah Akhundzada has been dead for months now, which is possible, right? But there's no reason to suspect that. Well, so apparently, this great segue to the next topic, he put out a decree regarding women, right? And basically, it's kind of a step forward for the Taliban. It basically says that women have to consent to marriage and they're allowed to get divorced and they can receive inheritance and shit like that. Nothing about school or working, but at least on paper, it says that rape and forced marriage is bad. The problem is, I saw that and that's appealing or appeasing to the urban centers, right? The places like Herat and Mazar-e Sharif and Kabul where women do have rights. You go to fucking Darude and Aruzgan, they're not gonna pay any mind to hell. They'll probably never hear about the decree in some of those villages.
Goat herders aren't going to stop. Yeah, goat herders aren't going to stop selling their daughters because their income would be negatively affected by that.
The government's so decentralized that a decree by the leader of the Taliban is meaningless to somebody. Yeah, exactly. That lives out in the middle of nowhere. So
yeah. It'll be whoever the local fucking Taliban commander, like basically whatever he pushes out is what goes. And I have no doubt the guys up there in that part of southern Afghanistan are going to ignore it, and Taliban leadership wouldn't care one way or the other because, well, that's kind of how they want it to be anyways, right? They just that decree from Habatullah, allegedly, like, he might be dead, but we all could be dead. This could be a whole fucking simulation. There's a fourth Matrix movie. We never know, right? Like,
don't remind me.
It's certainly possible. I know. Like, there's a good chance that if fucking Berater ever heard about a commander in fucking Kajaki and Helmand not enforcing this edict, that he would not lift a finger to do anything about it.
And and to be fair, the Taliban has bigger problems now. I mean, you're going into a winter of famine, and you're going into funds being tied up by the United States, in banks. The Taliban are going to face a lot of resistance, I think, in the coming year, because if people are starving, I mean, that's generally what provokes people to riot against the government, is when you don't have your basic needs met and you have a bunch of unemployed men with nothing to do, you're going to have problems. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, but so I guess like the last thing before we actually get into the topic, right, is that these international aid organizations, or just the international community in general, they're still hounding this. The Taliban. It's imperative that they form an inclusive government. And listen, diversity is good, right? Like the the studies that show a diverse board of directors and stuff like that, diverse staff leads to better results. That's all quantifiable, and you can verify that with data. Okay, the Taliban don't give a fuck about diversity. And when you look at the issues that are plaguing Afghanistan right now, that's not number one. Okay, this idea that if we just get some Uzbeks and some Tajiks and some Hazaras in the government and maybe a woman or two, things will get better. It's like, that's not the fucking priority. People are literally starving, right? They have a famine. The Taliban took control of the dams that they don't know how to maintain. Okay, the gravy train from Iran has most definitely been shut off now that we are no longer in Afghanistan. Right, that relationship probably did a complete 180. Pakistan can only provide so much. Like this idea that, oh well, we'll give them the money, but they need to make sure that that they've got some people who are some underrepresented minorities in the government. It's like, no, that's not what they need to do in order to get that fucking money.
Yeah, I mean, it's once again Westerners applying, Western logic to a country that doesn't
Yep.
doesn't work that way. And really, you can't run Afghanistan, especially based on white people Twitter logic in the United States. Like, it's not going to work. I mean, it sounds
No.
nice, but that's just simply not the case. I mean, at the best of times, we should say, well, I'm happy the Taliban put out an edict saying that women are not property. Like,
Yeah.
that's a big step. That's a big step forward for the Taliban.
That's a very big step forward for them, right?
Yeah.
And it is.
And like I was
should
saying,
still be
like with the famine and everything coming, like I talked about the young men with nothing better to do than revolt against the government because they don't have their needs met. I mean, there's groups in there worse than the Taliban, and that's the big concern, is that the Taliban are in charge now, but there's groups in there worse than the Taliban, and if they don't play their cards right, they're gonna face resistance from some of these people.
Yeah, I would argue the Islamic State is definitely worse than the Taliban. Yeah. They are much more indiscriminate in their targeting of opposition and civilians, for that matter, right? Like, that's straight up out of the Golden Hekmatyar school of being a dick in Afghanistan. And if he ever gets a little fucking militia back together again, that's going to be more problems, right? There are certainly bigger problems than the Taliban's in charge. And the Afghanistan subreddit needs to fucking realize that. There was a post in there probably a week or two ago that somebody basically, how dare we acknowledge that the Taliban's a government? And I think I wrote on there, I'm like, who the fuck is in charge? It's not about acknowledging that they're in charge. It's just that realizing that they are in charge. You don't have to recognize them. Say, yeah, you're legitimate. It was about legitimacy. Yeah. If you want to say the Taliban is not the legitimate government of Afghanistan, fine. Go find me the legitimate government and tell me who's in charge. Because it looks like it's fucking Mullah Barater, who last I checked is a member of the Taliban.
Yeah. Who we incidentally, they don't give a fuck about what you say on the internet. No, like they don't care about your complaints in your Reddit threads. Like, absolutely not.
They're doing the thing that all fucking governments should do, and that's ignoring social media, right? And just doing their best in their own way, which is still terrible, right? Like, none of this is to say that the Taliban are any better today than they were yesterday or 25 years ago. They're still terrible people. They're still oppressive. Okay, they're still targeting minorities. They're still oppressing women. They're still chucking gay people off the top of buildings. Like, none of that shit's changed. But they are in charge, whether you like that or not. They are in charge. And so the Western world needs to pull their head out of their collective ass and stop trying to treat the Taliban like it's a homogenous society in fucking North Central Europe. It's not.
Yeah, we want to apply Western ideals to this country. It's never worked. It didn't work when we were there. It's not going to work 20 years from now. It's not going to work for 100 years from now. So, and that's a big problem I have. I mean, this is just kind of a side note, but not really. Just with, our social media and these people in general is that, who are you to say what's best for the country of Afghanistan? Like you sit here and you sip a latte from Starbucks and you bitch about it on your MacBook. It's like, but that's so far removed from that society that your opinion is completely irrelevant. Even if they did read it, they wouldn't agree with you.
No, 100%. And we kind of talked about that last week, right? When journalists have gone back to Baghdad and they've asked people, is it better now or was it better under Saddam? And it's like 50-50 because we don't really fucking know. Turns out the Western solution wasn't a good solution, right? You got to have, an Afghan solution for an Afghan problem. In that case, an Iraqi solution for an Iraqi problem. But speaking of Westerners not understanding how shit works in the Middle East and Central Asia, that is the theme of today's episode. So I guess after I pour this beer, we can get into it. 1 second. It's important. Now that we're on video, we got to get that so that the viewers at home can see it.
Get the nice head on there too. Yeah. Make sure they see.
I mean, it's a dark beer, so not that much. So yeah, it's like I think the biggest quandary when you look at the Middle East is why is Saudi Arabia good and why is Iran bad? Right. And this has huge ramifications for what has happened since, the 70s or the 50s, really. Right. Like it doesn't make sense. And in no surprise, it all goes back to oil. Right. Because, people don't understand that Canada right above us and Venezuela were also pretty good oil producers. I guess, but at the time it was the Gulf area was the chief oil exporter in the world. And so the U.S. and Britain and I believe the Dutch, they made deals with Iran and Saudi Arabia, or Persia and Saudi Arabia, and they created these trade agreements basically. And the agreement between the British and then Persia is actually that agreement, that company that was created, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, was the predecessor to British Petroleum, more commonly known as BP. Right, so that's where BP comes from. It was originally a joint English-Iranian or British-Iranian venture, and then Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister of Iran, nationalized the oil industry, and that it canceled the contract they had with the British government. And then a year later, there's a coup between that was planned by MI6 and the CIA to remove Mossadegh from power and put in somebody that's more friendly to the West, and that's when you get the Shah. And the Shah had already been there, right? But he became the actual head of state instead of just like a monarchical. Is that the word? Monarchical figure?
A monarch, yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll call it a monarch. That works too. So yeah, like then he rolls in, and people didn't like that, right? Mohammad Mossadegh was pretty popular amongst the Iranians, and he was actually pretty secular. A lot of Western reforms, things like Social Security and unemployment benefits and shit like that. And ultimately, the British and the U.S. were concerned that he may be trending closer to being friendly with Russia, especially after nationalizing the oil industry, their oil production. And so, well, he's got to go. There's no other option, and that leads to begins the repeated cycle of there's non-Muslims that don't look like us in Islamic lands, and they're doing shit that's not Islamic, and they're trying to convert our people and trying to influence them to not be good Muslims, and that leads to the revolution of 1979. And really, up before that, the U.S. had really good relationships with Iran going back to the mid 19th century, like doing some background reading, and apparently Andrew Jackson had a really good relationship with whoever the fuck was in charge of Iran or Persia at the time, right? And then after him, when you had the Great Game, the U.S. was a neutral party, and so Iran was worried about the British and the Russian empires. We weren't trying to go into Afghanistan, so they were friendly with us, right? And we had a pretty good relationship for 100 fucking years. And then you have the revolution in 79. And since then, we have had no diplomatic relations with Iran. And it's It's us saying they're terrible, and it's them saying we're terrible, and we all want to fucking kill each other. But at the same time, we're turning around and we're best friends with Saudi Arabia, and it makes zero fucking sense to me. They're the same fucking thing. They just have different branches of Islam that they follow.
Yeah, neither one is what I would consider like a very good human rights positive country.
No.
But you're right. I mean, it seems like Iran fell out of favor when they decided to. And generally, I think we talked about this before. Is like any country that decides they want to use their resources to better their own country rather than exporting some of that good out to the west is generally dealt with quickly because they are
Yeah.
weaker. They are simply weaker than hegemonic powers that have existed for the past 200 years. So I mean, if you're Libya, you want to nationalize your oil production. If you're Iran, like we won't stand for it. You do not stop the consumerism, man. Don't stop it.
Well,
Full
I
speed
guess
ahead.
with the original agreement that was made, um, the oil would be split. That what Iran was producing would go to the British government or the British government, and then what Saudi Arabia was producing was for us, and then like all the shit in the middle, everybody got a piece of. If I read it right, and that like this goes back to FDR. This is one of the things FDR did. So yeah, New Deal. Then he also helped create Iran as it is today. There's a number of issues that arise from that, right? You had the revolution in Iran was a religious one, right? It was people, the Ayatollah using the secular government and the very pro-Western leaders of the country as ammunition, basically, to get the old heads, the conservatives in Iran, riled up and garner that support to the point that there was a literal overnight revolution and the Shah is exiled to Italy and shit like that. And now the Ayatollah is the person in charge of the country. And I when we talk about Israel later, I've got a theory, but he doesn't apply to this theory. He's super anti-Israel, right? Like most Islamic countries over in the Middle East at this point are. Well, they create their Iranian special forces, the RGC, and we're seeing remnants of that now when you're dealing with Hezbollah and um, all the different Iranian-backed militias that were in Iraq when we were in Iraq, right? When we talked about EFPs last week, right? That was created by the Iranian special forces, and that copper cone that with a large enough charge would invert and pretty much pierce anything, and the concussion could and did kill hundreds of people. Um, that technology was brought to Iraq from the Iranians, and um, that's something that is, I think, a direct result of what we did in the 50s with the Shah and Mossadegh. And Iran, their hatred of us led to their support of the Taliban, even though prior to 9/11 they were staunch opponents of the Taliban. Like they did the whole thing where we're going to back them just because they're fighting the guy we don't like, which we've done plenty of times too. Like most countries with a semi decent military are guilty of backing a horse because it's going against another horse that they don't like.
Yeah, and especially
It
like
all
with
just
the
it's cyclical.
Taliban's historic, treatment of the Shia Hazara population. I mean, Iran kind of views itself as the Middle East's like center of like Shiaism. Essentially, they're the most Shia populated country in the region, and they've kind of tried to look out for the Iraqi Shia and the like east and southeast of that country, and the Hazaras and other smaller Shia groups within Afghanistan. And so yeah, it was it'd be shocking to some people to see them supporting the Taliban the way they did. But yeah, I mean it's 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 basically choosing your bigger enemy at that point, and turned out that was us, and it worked out enough for them. I mean, it's baffling to see like the downward spiral that our relationship with Iran took. I mean, I've talked to you guys a little bit about it before, but my grandfather was in the Air Force during Vietnam, and he also went over to Iran to train pilots over there during like the late 60s early 70s. Like he had his whole family living over there. My mom has has pictures of her as a little girl in Iran. And, like, it's such a huge turn from them being essentially, like allies and trade partners for so long to just switching over. And then you had, the war on terror kick off, and they're one of the big three listed as, one of the three pillars of the axis of evil. And it seems so
Yeah.
stupid that relationship is so bad when we're willing to tolerate Saudi Arabia. Like, Iran is definitely no worse than Saudi Arabia when it comes to supporting terror groups. I mean, Saudi Arabians were involved in the planning of 9/11. Like, it's just baffling.
I mean, the biggest financiers of the Taliban outside of Pakistan, the biggest financiers are from fucking Saudi Arabia and Qatar,
Yeah.
where we have military bases and friendly, good diplomatic relations.
And we sell them
That is
weapons.
utterly ridiculous. Yes,
Every
we are
presidency.
currently giving Saudi Arabia, they're getting weapons right now to like interact in the Yemeni civil war, which is just Saudi Arabia killing the Shia to the south of them.
Yeah.
And guess who doesn't like that? Fucking Iran. Shocking, right? So Iran's going to pour more resources into maintaining control of Iraq, right? They're going to pour more resources into helping the Assad regime in Syria. They're going to pour more resources into helping the Houthi rebels in Yemen. I think they're the Shia of the two organizations. I can never remember.
And no one will correct you.
Right, that's not going to change. Well, if I'm wrong, make sure you put a little footnote or something.
Yeah, I mean, you have to though. I mean, if you're Iran, if you recognize, and this has been talked about before in many articles that I've read too, is you recognize that in a toe-to-toe battle with any hegemon out there, whether that be Russia, China, United States, you're going to lose. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. So Iran, over the years has, created things like sleeper cells. They've really exported these crazy good guerrilla tactics, sleeper cell agents, all that kind of stuff to just disrupt people, because it's kind of like okay, I know I can't win, but we can really sabotage stuff, and they're very good at it. We saw that a lot in Afghanistan, like you talked about, just funding the Taliban. But then they also, would recruit Hazaras. We've talked about that before. The Shia minority in Afghanistan, they would recruit them to go fight in Syria when that kicked off. They give resources and aid to them. It's like there's always an Iranian influence there, and I do think that they have these plans in place should anything happen to them. Like should things start going south for them, I think they can make people hurt pretty bad. So they're a threat. They are.
And the whole reason for these two countries to be so involved with these external actors, if you will, is that at the end of the day, there's got to be a common unifying factor, right? In America, most of us will say that we are Americans. In Iran, most people will say they're Iranian, but the big draw for the people of Iran is the Shia community, and that's international, right? That's worldwide, and Iran has an interest in preserving that community, just like Saudi Arabia has an interest in preserving the Sunni community. Although I believe the Sunni community is larger. And that's part of why Iran is so hell bent on helping out pretty much any local actors in the region that they can, except for Azerbaijan, which apparently is like 97% Shia Muslim, and they fucking hate each other. Whatever.
Well, I didn't know that. That's new knowledge for me.
Yeah, Azerbaijan has the largest percentage of Shia Muslims of a nation, I believe. I think Iran's like 90%, and Azerbaijan's like 95 or 97. Again, could be wrong. I'm wrong often, but they don't get along very well.
Iran funded insurgents in Iraq as well against the United States. Anything to just weaken the United States, their sworn enemy. If it's a Stinger missile here, if it's this or weapons or money, it's like whatever. We can afford it. It's probably, it'll get traced back to us, but what's anybody going to do? So
and you see people who, like the Western, or even just the outside world, not necessarily the Western world, but especially amongst us in the West, when it gets to election week or election year in Iran, people are like, look at all these young people out there protesting, and then like the most conservative person wins in a fucking landslide. Well, again, it's a authoritarian theocracy. That's not going to change anytime soon. The young people are still the minority of voices in that country. And because I remember the first Iranian election when I was in the army and we were gearing up to go to Iraq. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. There's all these young people that want to get rid of Ahmadinejad and they want to move towards a more Western style of government and recognizing rights for individuals. And my chief's like, I'm not going to fucking do that. And oh boy, was he right. It's like, it's almost like he knew, it's like his job to know these things. And that's not going to change, right? And it's definitely not going to change in Saudi Arabia, where just the fucking the House of Saud is still fucking running the show to the point that they can literally kill a journalist, and we didn't do dick all about it. One of the more disappointing things from the Trump administration, when the information and evidence is so widely openly available, to just kind of and move on, I thought was extremely shameful. Right, but we, God forbid, we do anything to disturb the apple cart, and we might not get oil, or the price of a barrel of oil might go up $4 that week if we say something bad about Saudi Arabia.
And they have money. I mean, I just watched the Formula One race for the first time at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia this past weekend, and like it was a cool street circuit, but the whole time you're like, I wonder how they got this Formula One race, especially when like the drivers are wearing like, we support gay rights shirts and stuff like that. Like, the Saudis like.
I have a really hard time. So I love golf. I can watch golf. I can play golf. I can talk golf all day, right? And they have a Middle Eastern swing on the European tour where they go to Dubai and Saudi Arabia. And like there's this whole golf Saudi Arabia campaign, and it's very attractive blondes from England who are out there playing this course, and it's like no, and they're wearing it's not tight fitting clothes, right? But it's athletic wear, so it's not necessarily loose either. And I'm like, this would never fly in this fucking country. But how much money are they giving you to come out there and do this? Now, this is utterly ridiculous. Like the people in the stands, or like the audience that's there, they're all in their the traditional white garb with the red and white headdress. It's like they're going to leave that golf course and they're going to go back to being awful human beings, right? But you did that because you got a $15,000 check to go out there and say that shit. I have a really hard time with countries that go out, or with people from the West who go to places like Saudi Arabia and act like they're not just terrible fucking people.
Yeah,
right.
It's kind of sad, like on the national level, that the U.S.'s oil issues are largely solvable with the advent of fracking and other avenues for for getting oil close by, or pulling in oil from Canada, but we keep refusing to do that. And it's like, if you really if you really want to help ease off of our reliance on these other countries that we don't agree with politically, it might be an avenue to go down. But fucking tree huggers, man. I got family over in California, and they're just they're in the little red blip with all the farmers, and or I guess more purple blip, and all the farmers in the center, and they just deal with those kinds of issues, like freaking tree huggers ruining things for everybody. Like, oh, we can't build a dam that'll mess up these little see-through fish that we love, and things like that. So it's a little off topic, but my uncle used to put up those like telephone towers, and like every now and then there'd be like enough of a like the thump pushed up from people being upset about it, destroying the natural landscape, that they like disguise them as trees. So you have these telephone towers that look like these really gaudy, like Disneyland trees out in the middle of nowhere to make some freaking sandal wearing hippie happy. It's just,
I'm sure they cost twice as much, and that's being paid by the taxpayer.
Yeah, and birds love to run into them and die. It's great.
Yeah. No, I mean, no, you're right. There are certainly solutions outside of having this reliance on Saudi Arabia, right? We could certainly be energy independent of them, at least.
There's always nuclear, but that's scary for people.
there's always nuclear, but fuck, people don't like the idea of nuclear because 3 Mile Island happened, what, 40 fucking years ago, and nobody knows what the hell that actually means. And yeah, like, I think we're all on board with the idea that climate change is man-made. I know Stu and I have talked about this, right? It is an issue, and it can be reversed, and it should be reversed. And a great way to do that would be nuclear. And it works out two ways because it makes us less reliant on Saudi Arabia outside of things you can't do with nuclear energy, like fucking run a car, make shit out of plastic.
Yeah.
I've played Fallout, and in Fallout they got small nuclear reactors in the cars that power them. But anyway.
Oh, then I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
There you go, Zach.
I've read retro-futuristic sci-fi novels back in the 50s. I mean,
those were neat, huh? It's like you just stick a little piece of plutonium in something and then it just runs for years. I mean, sucks that it doesn't work like that, but
then you get rear-ended and blown to pieces along with the entire city block.
Man, if you did that, nobody would ever nobody would ever get a speeding ticket if everybody had a little nuclear reactor in the back of their fucking car.
Just detonate a city block. And speaking,
everybody would be driving like 12 miles an hour.
Speaking of people that have nukes that probably don't need them, let's talk about Israel.
Good segue. Good segue.
Oh, I wanted. Yeah, we'll have to come back to Saudi Arabia. I wasn't done, but yeah, let's. I do want to talk about Israel.
We can talk. Well, they're so intertwined, you know.
They are. It's going to come up in this anyways.
Well allied.
Yeah, like. Israel, I think, is the shining example of the West getting fucking involved in shit that's not their goddamn business. Right? Like you had the state of Palestine or the nation of Palestine, whatever you want to call it, Palestine. And within Palestine, there were already Jews living there, and there were already Muslims living there, and they already didn't like each other. Crazy. They got along a little better, but then in rolls the West, and we carve up this shit and say, hey, it's no longer Palestine, it's Israel. And they pretty much fucking hated each other ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Israel.
I was going to say, I was going to shout out a podcast called the Martyr Made Podcast. If you've never listened to it, he's got a Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem. And it's like, 6 episodes. They're very in depth. It talks about the founding of Israel and just how much manipulative stuff basically went on in Western governments, especially during World War I and World War II, to found that state after it was all over. And like talks about promises that were abandoned to the Arab people at the end of World War I. The whole Lawrence of Arabia issue, and it's like it's wild. You'll listen to that and you're like, okay, first of all, the ADL is going to shut me down probably, but like. You listen to that, you're like, huh, that seems really sketchy how this whole thing was started up. I mean, I'm not saying like the Palestinians or whatever were not like combative toward it, but it was like every year it was like they lost a little bit more and a little bit more of their autonomy in Palestine. And all because the West was like basically promoting this new state. It's interesting podcast, so check it out. Martin.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, man. Do you think God wants those filthy Canaanites living on the holy people's land? Come on now.
And that's another thing about Israel. It is our evangelical crazy ass government's love for it, which freaks me out a little bit. It's like a doomsday cult that infests our government.
I remember Michelle Bachmann when her crazy ass was running for president, and they asked her a question regarding Israel. Because, so like every couple years, tensions flare up out there, and like they like annex some more parts of the West Bank and shit, and like bulldoze apartments and put up new ones. And there's some questionable behavior, right, amongst the Israeli government. I don't think that's unfair to say. But they were asking the candidates at the Republican debate something about Israel and what our relationship should be towards them. And Michelle Bachmann said, Israel is our greatest ally. And my immediate thought was, name a war that they fucking helped us. Outside of Charlie Wilson's war.
Yeah, well, they love getting us involved in things that they don't end up sending people to fight in. That's interesting. And and of course, I mean, you could also look up the Uss Liberty Incident. Where Israeli planes, I believe, struck one of our ships.
Yeah, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
They like spying on us too. That's something that gets kind of brushed under the rug. Yeah, but like as I get it. We spy on our allies, but as base, like Israel's somewhat viewed as like a vassal state at some level, right? Like they're seen as like an independent power, but they're also kind of our little brother in the region, you know. So it makes it slightly less okay that they're constantly like spying on us, you know, as opposed to, you know, other stuff.
That's fair.
I've heard the United States described as an Israeli vassal state, and that we do everything they want us to do.
That we do,
and they don't really contribute much. So
it's like that scene. Speaking of Charlie Wilson's War, like Julia Roberts' character, she's like, "How many?" She's like, "You know, what gets you into power?" And Charlie Wilson, you know, Tom Hanks says, "Well, Jews get me in the office." She goes, "How many Jews are in your district?" He goes, "Oh, well, a dozen, but I'm talking about on the Hill." You know, like, stuff like that. There is certainly that perception, right? There's definitely that perception that we work for Israel, and I think a large part of it is religious, and I think a large part of it is because the American people don't understand Islam, and it's a huge factor in it, right? They just see that Israel and everybody around Israel is fucking fighting, and we know Israel, we know the Holocaust was bad, and we know that that was mainly affecting Jews. And we know that they're our ally. Well, if the Jewish nation is our ally, then clearly the Islamic nations around them are not our allies. Even though Jordan is an ally, Egypt was an ally.
Jordan's king is awesome, by the way. Like, I mean, I don't know much about his policies, but he goes out with his big fucking beard, and isn't he a pilot or something like that?
I don't know. He's the king. He can do whatever the fuck he wants.
I know he went and bombed ISIS with people. I think he just flew on board one of those bombers or something. But yeah, I mean, he went out and I mean, at least contributed.
Yeah, I mean, he as far as I know, he's not as. I think Jordan and Israel actually have pretty decent relations. I know Israel has good relationships with some of those Islamic countries in the region. And it's a great thing to bring up because I have the opinion. This is Zach's little personal theory on religious-based policies or politics in the Middle East and North Africa. Most of these Islamic countries don't give a flying fuck that Israel is there, but it appeals to the people when they say things like, we're going to blow Israel out of the water. Yeah, right? Like, I don't think the fucking king of Saudi Arabia gives a fuck that Israel is there, but it's good PR to say that they're going to destroy the Jews.
Yeah, I think he does care because we regularly supply them with weapons and stuff like that. But I think... Yeah, but you're right. It does get the people riled up. I mean, Iran's been using that. The great Satan, Israel, the United States, and all that. But I'm always blown away when our, evangelical politicians are like so gung ho about Israel when they don't need to be. It's like Israel doesn't do anything for you.
Well, a lot of people's like perception of Israel is rooted in like 2,000-year-old texts. You know, I mean. A lot of people learn about Israel as it was before the fall of the Roman Empire, and they
act like it's the same state. They act like it's the same thing. Or whatever,
the same people.
Nothing has changed,
and it's not a bunch of Europeans that moved there in the last 70 years.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like nothing has changed since Jesus was crucified, except Orlando Bloom tried to save the city. Right. Like, that's all anybody knows. Yeah. Right. That's a good movie. That's such a good movie. I enjoyed Kingdom of Heaven.
Especially the director's cut of that. And I've been listening to that Crusades podcast too. I mean, it's wild how these people generally, until people came around and like started stoking tensions, generally got along pretty well. Like even like the Crusader states and like Jerusalem at the time, you had they basically kept to themselves and stuff, but they didn't just like go around and just slaughter each other like in Jerusalem. Like everybody like
you need to text
live together. So.
You need to share that podcast with me so I can listen to it.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, she's really in depth and a lot of episodes. But yeah, it's really interesting because that's obviously not the way it is now. So
yeah, but the idea that Israel is our greatest ally. I think if you put it into context and you think about America in the 250 years roughly that we've been around, our greatest ally is probably France. Like historically speaking. I think our greatest ally power-wise now, they were certainly our first. I think our greatest ally now, when you look at capability, is probably Great Britain.
I think Australia has actually supported us in more of our efforts than any other nation.
They're my favorite.
And probably Canada.
Yeah, I'd say Australia is my favorite
of our
Five Eyes. Yeah.
Oh, I love Australia.
It's great talking to them. I did have an awkward interaction with one of them once. We were out smoking. I think you might have been there, Zach, and I tried to ask in Australian
Oh,
about
you
the
asked
great
about
the
the
Great
Emu
Emu
War.
War, and he pretended he didn't know anything about it. You fucking learned about that. If I know about it, you know about it. Come on.
Yeah. I love Australia.
Yeah.
Country founded by inmates. What's not to love?
Yeah.
Yeah, for a country founded by inmates, they seem to be going to a very authoritarian government now. But that's
Banned.
not a topic for now, I don't think.
People will be able
Yeah, but
to leave the camps once the crisis is over.
Soon
That's
as COVID
how it
goes
always
away, you'll
works,
be
right?
free.
Yeah, that's how it
Yeah.
always works.
You'll be free to go.
Yeah.
You're fine.
yeah, it's like Australia. I mean, probably Great Britain, Canada, and Australia are our three currently biggest allies. Certainly most supportive. New Zealand's just in there because like we needed a place to put some fucking satellites or some shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think France is mad at us about nuclear submarines or something right now.
I don't
But-
care.
Yeah,
they
but, I mean,
hate us
we
because
have-
they ain't us. All right, they're sitting out there. They share one super carrier with Great Britain. Like that's sad. Our navy
That's
is
cute.
Our navy is crazy as far as tonnage goes.
We have a love-hate
Yeah.
relationship with France, really. Like sometimes we're like all buddy-buddy, and then sometimes we just hate each other. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's fine. We generally get along. And then
We always bail
Israel-
them out.
Israel ain't it though. Israel ain't it. That's
No.
for sure. They're
No.
not our greatest ally. They spy on us. I mean, look at the Jeffrey Epstein thing. I mean, there's a very good theory that was connected to like Mossad. They found all those passports and stuff that he had, and there's a very good chance that was just a honeypot sting. Like, I mean, just to set U.S. politicians and people of power up to just blackmail them later. There's a very good chance that was
Are you saying
what
that
was going on.
Mossad killed Jeffrey Epstein,
I don't know.
or that he faked his suicide?
I don't think he killed himself. I'll put it that way.
No, you're absolutely right. But that presents the problem with having allies. Right? This is a statement I've held on to for a while. Right. The downside of having allies is that you're immediately going to have enemies. If you just have diplomatic and economic trade relations with every country to whatever degree you can, things tend to work out better, right? Like we may not have a lot of trade going on with Micronesia, but we're not going to be dicks to them just because we don't have any trade going on with them.
Yeah.
We can trade with Israel. We can trade with Saudi Arabia. We can trade with Iran if we really wanted to, and Cuba. And we can all get along fine because it's a business decision. But no, it's got to be more than that. It's a lot of religious-based nonsense because, like you said, Stu, people read the Old Testament, they read the New Testament, and they go, well, that's all for Israeli history.
Yeah. Well, on top of that, it's like, as an ally, what if we got into a conflict with a country in the region, which we have, Israeli troops wouldn't be able to go in and help us. Like they'd be targets just because they're Israeli. Like there's no area in their sphere of influence that they'd be able to like physically send troops to support us.
But they're the largest beneficiary of U.S. foreign aid.
Hmm.
Just full stop. Whether it's for fucking rice or bullets, they're the largest. I think it's like $6 billion a year,
Yeah.
which is they're nuclear. Like you pointed out in season 1, dude. We shouldn't be giving nuclear countries any fucking money.
No. And I
But here
mean,
we
yeah.
are.
I mean, they have the coolest toys in the region. They can shoot down rockets. Like that's the crazy thing with their Palestine issues. It's like people in certain circles read, oh, well, Palestine attacks them all the time. Yeah, well, it's like insurgent cells essentially within Palestine that are shooting a rocket at Israel, and they can just shoot them down because they have CRAMs and shit.
What if maybe the solution after World War II was to just not resettle in Germany? Right? You didn't have to create a new state for a group of people because why the fuck would you do that? Like in hindsight, I think it's been a terrible idea. Not to say that Israeli people themselves are bad. They're not, right? Most people are inherently not bad. Not necessarily good, but they're inherently not bad. They're just trying to get through their fucking day. Right? Most Israelis now just happen to be born in Israel and they can't do a goddamn thing about that.
I'll do
Right?
you one better,
But
man.
maybe-
What if we had sent the Germans to Iran? So they renamed themselves the land of the Aryans. Boom, that would have solved our issues with Iran immediately. never would have had these problems.
Instead of letting them go to Argentina.
Yeah. If they were just sitting down there in Iran, cooking bratwurst and being industrious and, electing slightly authoritarian officials like they keep doing. I'm telling Merkel kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit with all her EU stuff, but we could have fixed
She's
things
almost
real
gone.
quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Israel ain't definitely not our greatest ally when people say that. That's simply not true. So
no. But so what I wanted to get to about Saudi Arabia that we addressed, but we didn't really get into the weeds. And it's really not just Saudi Arabia. It's also those other Gulf states, right? And we've brought it up in the past. The largest benefactors, donors to the Taliban movement, to Al Qaeda, to all these Sunni based groups that fucking hate us, are our allies, and we have bases in their countries. And we talk about the Doha meetings between the Taliban and the U.S. government, and that was like 20, 30 minutes down the road from a fucking U.S. airbase. The Taliban have had a political office in Doha for the better part of a decade, if not longer, and it's just there, right? We all know 17 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were fucking Saudis. And okay, whatever. Like there's all this information. There's a fucking paper trail showing the Saudi government funding these organizations. Are you telling me that the need for their oil is that dire? Is that important? There's no fucking way that it's that goddamn necessary to have a relationship, not with just bad people, right? I think you brought it up, Stu, that I think during the Kogan episode that you can influence people's actions by doing trade with them. Like, hey, we're not going to trade with you because of conditions X, Y, and Z, right? Like, why is that not happening with Saudi Arabia? Like, it's just at the end of the day, it is just oil. There are other places to get it. This doesn't make like West Africa is fucking full of that shit.
Yeah.
There's other places to get oil.
So you're saying we should trade more with China?
Man, you sound like the American voter. No, I'm not saying that we should trade more with China. Right?
Well, if we're going into
if
we're going into Africa, that's what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying, right? But the average American voter, and I do mean this. Like we get the government we deserve, and that's based on how we vote, right?
Yep.
The average voter will look at that statement where I say we should trade less with Saudi Arabia, and they would go, "Oh, so you want to increase trade with China?" It's not zero sum.
No.
China doesn't get more trade,
Yeah.
right? Other countries get more trade. That's how the game works. Or we just have less trade all around.
Yeah.
Right. At some point, we do need to put our foot down and say actions A, B, and C are unacceptable. Joe Biden, I think it was today or yesterday, announced a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics, which is largely symbolic, but it's fucking something, I guess, right? Regarding China's human rights record. So then we're not going to send any delegates to China, which, okay, cool, whatever. But it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the fact that they're literally locking up Muslims in the western part of the country and killing people who dissent politically, people that try to speak out against the government.
And they're stealing John Cena from us.
Fiction.
Being chilling.
Yeah, the Hollywood needs to shut the fuck up when it comes to China.
Yeah, Hollywood and sports. All of this kowtowing to China is really frustrating.
But it's all money, and just like when the oil all dries up, all those Gulf states are dead. That's literally, they function entirely off the oil economy. And it's like that Saudi proverb or whatever that guy says, like my father rode camels. It's like, and I drive like nice cars or whatever, and my grandsons will ride camels. Like it's just like that, the proverb, the wisdom that it's all just for a short time.
Well, I mean, the UAE's kind of looking to solve that for the future, right? Like they're moving away from oil and into other ventures, so they can keep giving each of their citizens like $60,000 a year, some crazy shit. Everyone in that country drives fucking Bentleys. I was over in. I was over there on leave or coming back to the States, and my Uber driver was a Tesla. That was pretty nuts.
Yeah, when I was in Dubai, they were all like black Lexuses, like the Ubers. Yeah.
So here's a question. Given what we know now, really 40 years after the Soviets went into Afghanistan, what, like, we can't remove the fact that we aided the Afghans during the Soviet Afghan War, right? What should we have done after the end of that Soviet Afghan War? Because I look at that, and I think that's the critical point, right? This is where our lack of understanding of the culture and the society out there really fucks us, because the war ends, and like we were talking about, where countries will get involved not to really help out a country, but to piss off another country. We didn't get involved to help out the Afghans. We used them to piss off the Soviets, or to bankrupt or defeat the Soviets, whatever you want to, embarrass them. And then the war's over, they leave, and we fucking stop. And I think about that last scene in Charlie Wilson's War, whether it's an accurate depiction of what happened or not, where he's trying to get $1 million to build a school in Afghanistan. And they're like, Charlie, nobody gives a fuck about a school in Pakistan. And I'm like, maybe that's the issue. Maybe the problem was we went in and we promised like all these arms and all this equipment to defeat these outside invaders. And I'm sure there were other promises about helping them further down the road. And then we fucking didn't do it, right? What if maybe that's the linchpin, and that when the Soviets leave, we do stick around and we help build up schools or madrasas or mosques or whatever it is, right? For Afghanistan, that would appeal to them, and that would create a government that's more open to dealing with the West, and more hesitant to allow Islamic extremism. It's absolutely possible. It's possible anywhere. We just have a really bad track record of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see three possibilities. One, we stick around instead of disappearing the day the Soviets leave, and we try to help rebuild, and hopefully aren't seen as like another foreign power trying to make their move on Afghanistan. Two, we split the country into like probably maybe three countries, at least two, definitely the Northern Alliance and like an Eastern Central power, and then maybe like the Shia population in like the West or something. Or three, we do what we did, and then we get less involved in international
nation building.
politics. Well, less involved in conflicts in the Middle East in the years leading up to 9/11, because that's essentially what Osama bin Laden used to garner support for Al Qaeda, was the fact that the U.S. was involved in all these countries in the Middle East. Going into I don't know how much Iraq factored into that. The first one, I mean, that's fairly justified. We just went in, blew shit up, and then
Yeah.
left. But
I mean,
besides
I'm
that,
sure they used it.
yeah,
No, so like that's a good point. And I remember the 2008 Republican presidential primaries. This is before Rudy Giuliani lost his goddamn mind. Um, he was a candidate for president, and he started every answer with, "When I was mayor of New York during 9/11." But they asked Congressman Ron Paul from Texas about, or they asked a general question just regarding the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Ron Paul brought up the idea of blowback and the CIA study that had been published a couple years prior, explaining blowback and the consequences for our actions. I have a 6-year-old son, right? He understands there are consequences for actions. So there's no reason that adults can't understand it as well. And the CIA admits that all this meddling in the Middle East and North Africa and Central Asia, it has created an environment of hate and discontent amongst the local Muslim populations, and they in turn use that as fuel to recruit, train, and develop these insurgent organizations. Right? It's all right there in the fucking CIA report, and Congressman Paul brings it up, and Rudy Giuliani. This stands out in my memory so clearly, because I was just amazed that it was his response, where Congressman Paul brings this up, and Rudy says, that's really astounding. I'm really offended by that. I'm really offended that you could say that the reason that we were attacked in America is because of something that happened over there." I'm like, it's pretty clear fucking cut, right? There's that meme that, oh, Iran wants war with America. Look how close they put their country to our bases, and we have something like 30 bases just bordering the nation of Iran, between Iraq and Afghanistan and some shit above it,
yeah.
right? The people don't understand this whole argument that they hate us for our freedoms is fucking wrong. It has never been about our freedoms. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard, especially regarding the war on terror. They don't like us because we are in Islamic lands. And usually we're there at the invite of the host nation, but it doesn't matter to them.
But I mean, it's the same thing we talked about with what the Middle Eastern countries do. And they put this Israeli boogeyman out there to their people because it gets the people riled up. So we say, oh, we're doing it for our freedoms. You know, that gets the boomers riled up here.
Oh yeah.
And, same kind of tactic.
Yep. It makes no sense to me.
I guess in closing, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the North Dakota Oil Pipeline. Keep hope alive, boys. And
right.
Thanks for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below, and
He's got it.
Join us next week. Thank you. Yeah,